All right, it looks like everybody's getting situated. It is 3 o'clock, and we are here today for our August 19th Citywide Advisory Committee meeting for the zoning code rewrite. I want to go ahead and bring up our agenda, and we can go through that just like we normally do. Today, we do have our meeting, and we will be discussing really the Module 2 structure and overview, a little bit about some dimensional standards, and then we also want to go over some new material or some major changes that we are creating as part of Module 2. Before we get too far along, though, I did want to let each and every one of you know that as the city and Clarion began to craft Module 2, we realized just how much information is in Module 2, the complexity of all of that information, and how it can support all of our citywide initiatives that we currently have. So specifically housing, climate change, transportation, and equity. And so as we have been crafting and working on this, it is taking us a lot longer than we anticipated. And we wanted to also make sure that we could align with some of those citywide initiatives. So while originally we were anticipating that we would be able to present something to you in August for Module 2, we're actually a little bit behind. So we're taking our time to make sure that we're getting the language right. We're supporting the things that we need to. And we're also thinking about how we can effectively engage our community, knowing that we are still within a pandemic, and that pandemic is a little bit volatile. So where we're at right now is we're continually working on those things, and we're going to keep you apprised as new information comes about. But we're thinking we're probably going to need another month or two. So anticipate on Module 2 coming back to you sometime this fall is what we're thinking. But we want to make sure that we have a solid engagement plan and we have a solid Module 2 that we feel comfortable presenting to the community that supports everything that's important to us. So I just wanted to let each of you know that we are a little bit behind, but it's important stuff, and we want to make sure that we're getting that right. So I do want to take a look at our vision, because that's what we're using as a city, and Clarion as we craft Module 2. We're really trying to create that city for everyone and making sure that we're creating safe and healthy city for everyone, a home for everyone, movement for everyone, a clean city for everyone, opportunity for everyone, and then making sure that we are actually engaging everyone as well. So we're taking into account the vision, implementing Blueprint Boise, our comprehensive plan, making sure that we are fully engaging our citizens and stakeholders, finding that balance between traditional Euclidean form-based and performance-based zoning tools, making this a user-friendly document that has good quality illustrations and that anybody can utilize it, and all of those things. So we're working, and we know, and we're so thankful that you're helping us work through this as well. So as we know, there's 20 of us, and we are all kind of a sounding board for a lot of these ideas and giving us directions and raising all of the right questions for us to ask and be able to address. And we thank you for that. Rules of engagement haven't changed, so we're just going to do our personal best, be ready to learn, being patient and respectful to one another, listening actively, of course, being kind and thinking openly and thinking in a community mindset, and then being prepared and ready to share our thoughts. So I think that gives us a good start. And I would like to welcome Don, and we'll let him take it from there.
All right. Well, thank you. And a good introduction, Andrea. I would second. I've been watching the chat box, and there's been some endorsement for the additional time. I've done a lot of this over the last quarter century. The key issue, as I probably have told you before, is not how fast Clarion can write, or frankly, it's not even how fast we can deliver it. It is how clearly we can think through these issues and make sure they are internally consistent, and then explain it to people. So that is my personal feeling, is that this is time well spent, and it is a good thing to try to figure out. And here's the reason, and I've said this before too. Every action that government takes has reactions in the marketplace. And when you're trying to do sustainability, and you're trying to do affordability, and you're trying to do connectivity, we can all think up good ideas. The question is, will they get in the way of other ideas? And what do they cost? They always cost something, either in terms of price or in terms of missed opportunities to do something else more than this. And so that's why I think it's wise to take the time to walk through these issues carefully. Frankly, if you guys don't understand it, I think you do understand it so far, but we want to make sure we walk through them carefully. If you don't understand it, the public's not going to understand it. And so we do need to take our time to do this. So with that, I'm going to share. We have a fairly short presentation today, but it covers a fair amount of ground. And I want to leave time, as we've always said, to do it. Let me see if I can do this. Can I chat? Do you guys have, which screen do you have? The full screen or the presenter mode?
Presenter.
We have presenter mode right now.
All right, so how about that? Better? Or is that not better?
It's the same,
I
Dawn.
don't see any change on my end.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, let's try something else then.
It appears that you didn't actually click the button, like you brought up the option, but haven't engaged it.
Okay, let's try it again then. I will hope for better this time. So, and if not, I'll just switch my screens around. So, well, come on, Don. Give it a second. Sorry, guys.
We're rooting you on, Don.
Yeah, well, why is this always the hardest part of the day? That's what I want to know. So one more time, we'll try it. And if that doesn't work, we'll do something else. Have we got full screen yet or not? Yes? Nope.
No,
Oh, I see.
we
Wait.
still have the same screen.
How about that? Better?
No,
We're
still same.
all right. Well, let me do something here. Let me try something. I'm sorry. I'm going to do it a different way, and we'll just do it. I'll do it a different way. Let's try this. Let's try this. You'd think after a year of Zoom, we'd be better at this, but anyway. You getting it now or not? Nope.
I think it's still thinking about it.
Okay. Well, I will warn you guys, I have had some unexpected and a very unusual computer problems today. So that maybe that's what's going on right here. Let me try something else. Still presenter mode?
No, I think you're in business.
Is that right? We have got the cover sheet and this is the timeline. Yes?
Oh, we just switched. We just
can see
switched
it.
back.
We can see it.
You can
This
see
will
it.
work.
All right.
Yeah, we
Oh.
can see it. Go ahead and move forward. It looks
All right,
great.
okay. Okay, given that it doesn't look great, it looks great. Okay, fine. Let's get going. So you have seen this timeline before. The green bar is where we are right now. We are working on public input for module 2. We're trying to get to that public input. What I want to point out is very simply is that the blue bar on the right Wendy and others and Andrea have been very clear that we need a lot of time to think it through at the end when we have got the drafting and the questions through. There's a lot of time there. The fact that we are going to take a month or maybe more to get to this module 2 does not mean we're running out of time. Compared with other cities where I've worked, you've left a lot of time to think it through and get it right at the end. We are to some extent borrowing from that time, but I'm not worried about it at all, because the amount of time you've left was in the same spirit, aimed at a lot of public engagement and understanding. So here we go. May, June, July. This differs because today's meeting is not going to be about, today's meeting is going to be key things, but the next meeting is not going to be walking through the ordinance. So what we're going to cover today: dimensional standards in more detail, sustainability and resilience, incentives, access and connectivity, parking, operations, and other. Now that sounds like a lot. We're going to spend a lot of time on the first part of this because it is complicated. So I'm going to move on, and I'll just, here it is again, basically. I want to review, and we're trying to present this in a way that helps you deepen your understanding of these parts of module 2 without assuming that the draft that staff is reviewing right now is the draft. They are in the process of questioning things. And so we're trying to explain them in a way that doesn't presume that the answer is the answer yet, because it is still in review stage. I want to review the structure a little bit just because it has differed from what it is before. As I said before, dimensional standards, and I'll talk about it more in a minute. One of the new things we have done is the incentives for sustainability and resilience. I want to make sure people understand that. Access and connectivity, as we've said several times, is a brand new chapter. It is usually buried in the middle of subdivision standards and public works standards and site planning standards in many codes. And the point is, let's highlight it, because Blueprint Boise says multimodal, efficient, not only transit, but walkable, bikeable, people-friendly connection is a priority. Okay, so it's its own chapter. I'm going to walk through a little bit of what's in that chapter. Parking has got some significant changes, and we need to walk through that too. And then operations and maintenance is a brand new section. So, and then we'll stop for questions at each time. So we're one level up now. What is the structure of module 2? We have presented this before. It's been refined a little bit. You'll notice that the lines on the right, there are more lines on the right. Weren't you trying to streamline this, Don? Yeah, we are, but we're also trying to consolidate and address things that were not in the old structure. So, or not adequately in there. And we're trying to integrate the subdivision stage. I'll talk more about that in a minute. The stage at which you plat lots and lay out streets and parks and drainage, trying to integrate that better with the rules that govern, okay, I own a piece of land and I want to redevelop it, or it's vacant land and I want to develop it. That's just to avoid the jargon. Subdivision is the creation of the lots and the streets and the roads, many of which are given to the city and then become public infrastructure and form the framework going forward. And then now you got a framework: lots, streets, parks, drainage. What are the rules about what you can do on each lot? And that the intent of this structure is to integrate them better, so they're not working at cross purposes. So applicability, I'm reading down the right-hand side. Lot and building forms and dimensions. We have put together next to each other how big the lot needs to be, or how tall the building can be, how far away from its neighbors. That's collected in that section better than it is in the old code. Subdivision, I just talked about. Talk about which of these standards have to be addressed when you first lay out lots, as opposed to things that have to be done when you're doing individual lot development. Sensitive lands is the same thing. It is, where do you have to avoid sensitive lands? If you look over at the left-hand side, there is no such section. There is hillside and foothills, great, and that is good. You guys have spent a lot of time on that. That's one form of sensitive land. Floodplains and other things are another form. So this is collecting in one place. Where are the things that the city wants us to avoid when we lay out lots and when we subdivide them? Access and connectivity, I just talked about. Parking and loading. Landscaping is already addressed, although we've strengthened it. Building design is addressed in more detail, as I described last time. So you have it now in your design review process, but a lot of that's outside the ordinance. And as we said before, the key things are being brought into the ordinance. Exterior lighting is a new section. You already have historic streetlight districts, some places where you want a particular type of light. You did not have, and you had some in design standards too, but you didn't have basic code provisions on downcast lighting, making sure that everything is contributing to dark skies. Signs is in there, and then operations and maintenance is new. So the list is longer in the new one of topics than the old one. Part of that is trying to align it with Blueprint Boise. The rest of it is trying to integrate subdivision better and to describe it, orient it in a way that people understand all the things they need to do as they move forward with development better than they do currently. So see if I can do it now. So I'm going to go quickly through these next slides, but this is a little bit of a rehash from last time, not much, but let me start here. We're going to spend the first little while on dimensional standards. Boring, right? I mean, it's just numbers, and it's not the fun part of zoning, but it's extremely important to preserving neighborhood character, to promoting affordability. These are the basic rules in this case of how big is your lot? How big does it have to be? How much of it can you build on? What else do you need to get on the lot, like open space or something else, or parking, in addition to your building and your accessory buildings? So this is kind of the zoning districts or the building blocks of zoning. When you develop a parcel, this is kind of the building blocks of, so how big a building or how much building as opposed to other things can I do on it? It's very important to most neighbors, most citizens. Is it going to be a tall building? First question, how tall will the building be? Second, how close will it be to me? And then if you're into planning, it's kind of like, and will we be looking at a parking lot or will we be looking at something else? And so I just want to go through the various things we talked about last time. Lot area minimum, very simple. In most codes, including yours, there is in each zone district neighborhood, a size of lot that is a minimum. Now, if you're historic and somebody a long time ago platted that lot smaller than the current ordinance allows, that's okay. You could still build on it. The code addresses that. But as you create new lots, the framework going forward, how big does a lot have to be? And how wide does it have to be? Because from your neighbor's point of view, they don't know how deep your lot is. When they look across the street, it is more a function of, are they about the same character I am in terms of spread outedness from each other? Is there light and air across the street or in a different part that are similar to the light and air? You don't have to. You can have more dense development, but why do we worry about lot width? Answer has a lot to do with perceived character, maybe more than lot area, because you don't know how deep that parcel is across the street. Could be quite deep, could be bigger, could be smaller. You don't know, but you do see how wide the lot is. So again, and the provisions in the code allow some averaging of that. Okay, they can be flexible, but they have to hit an average. That's two measures. 3 is street frontage minimum. Basically, the distance along the front property line that fronts on a street or alley. So, well, Don, didn't you just talk about width? Yes, but you get pie-shaped lots and you get other kinds of lots. And so the point is, okay, but how much of this has to be on the street so we can get a driveway in, if we're going to get a driveway? Some don't. Or for just spacing out of utilities and things like that. So lot width is measured as kind of an average. Lot frontage is how much of it has to be on the street for these purposes, usually access and character. Open space as a minimum of the total area. You just look at the graphic, you can tell it's like lot size. How much of the lot can you not build on? Because that is often how you back into what you can do. So that is another. Now we've covered 4. Here's 5, building setbacks. How far do you have to be from the front, the back, the sides? Parking setbacks minimum, meaning do you have to set the parking back further in different areas? A, either in a commercial area because we don't like looking right at cars right up on the street, or B, in a house because we want the car to be off the street and not overhanging the sidewalk. And a lot of newer codes are saying this. We don't really want to push the houses back from the street. We want to make sure the cars are off the street and into a sidewalk. Do we have to have parking? No. Could you get rid of this? Yes. In alley loaded areas, it doesn't matter much if there's rear loaded alley access. But old style codes just said everything's back a minimum of 20 feet because we're driving big cars and we want them off the street. And newer codes kind of say there's a different question, how far the parking has to go back and how far the building has to go back. Because the building might be okay to come closer to the street for the sake of affordability than the parking does. And again, do you have to do this? No, but these are common measures. Now we've covered 6 different ones. Dimensional standards, building height, maximums. This is very traditional for flat roofs, for mansard roofs, for gable roofs. Everybody has a measure. Now we've covered 7 topics about what they actually do is define an invisible envelope, I call it, the invisible box. When you add open space, width, height, setbacks, parking setbacks, you are telling the developer there's a box within which you can build. And all of these together define the box, or the box is defined by whatever measures you choose to do these things. So height, obvious, pretty obvious to everybody. Now, that was primer, that was background. What are we proposing and how does it work? So we got some feedback, even initially after the last couple meetings. Don, Clarion seems to know what it's talking about, but this is very confusing. I don't know how to read this. I don't know. Will the building be bigger than it is before? Will it be taller than it is before? Taller question is easy. You just compare the old and the new heights, and frankly, they're not much change. But will it be bigger? Will it be more massive? Am I going to be able to build bigger? Because I might be able to get more units in and make them more affordable. The feedback we got back is we understand the words you're saying, and we don't understand what it means for the neighborhood or the character of the area. And so I want to walk through a couple of examples. Once again, the numbers have not been finalized, so I can't walk through exact numbers, but I do want to help you think through what we think this means. So on the left, what you got, and it varies, all these vary by zones. There's no one number. Minimum lot area is still there. It's on the left column, it's on the right column, but it's only for residential. Most newer codes say in the downtown area, in the activity centers that we've talked about quite a bit, it might be a historic small lot that has a small store in it. We actually don't care. We try to get houses and multifamily and places where people live to be about, or at least if they're way different in size, we have a reason for it. Otherwise, you kind of want residential development to be kind of like the other residential development that is near it, both in terms of width and area. Most newer codes say when you get into mixed use and commercial, there are a lot of reasons why it might be smaller than that, historic or otherwise. Or, we used to say that you had to have a size of this much for a grocery store. Well, now they do smaller format grocery stores, or we have plenty of grocery stores that are smaller that are from the old days that are still operating. So this is a change. We have kept it for the residential neighborhoods. We have not kept it for the mixed use and commercial neighborhoods. Frankly, that is a trend in the last 10 years, and I've never heard anybody complain about it. Nobody's said, oh, wow, we got some strange stuff happening because you got rid of those measures. I won't put words in your mouth. This has not been controversial around the country. Let's skip some. Minimum street frontage. After we talked about the layers of regulation in Boise, one of the things we came up with is we don't think we actually need that. There are plenty of codes out there who do not have that measure. So it is not being carried over. As opposed to lot width, yes, lot frontage, no. Density per acre. This is something to pay attention to. Density is usually used for residential development, and you now have a number of measures that say this many units per acre is fine. No more than that. We're taking your acreage, we're counting your houses and your units, and we're saying that's too many. Bring it down. As I have talked about before on these things, it's not a very accurate measure of how it's going to look and feel to people, because you could take a given density number and cluster it all in one area, even with minimum lot sizes, or put it all in another area, or stretch it out along the road. We could address it, but that means you're saying we have a number and the number creates unintended consequences. So we're going to add a bunch of regulations to make them more consistent. Better practice, we think, is to say, define the envelopes and the lot size. How many houses? How are they separated from each other? And the unit per acre is actually an output of that rather than an input. And this is, I won't say like the first two are very common. Most new codes do it. This one I will say is always a discussion item. More new codes than not, I think significantly more than not, decide to go this way. We do not need a density per acre number here. Let's deal with the form of the buildings. Are they too tall? Are they too close together? Are the lots too big? Are the lots too small? Are they too close to the road? Define that, and the number comes out. And frankly, this is an important affordability tool for a reason I'll talk about later. It's kind of an artificial number. Gee, Don, I could have gotten this many houses on lots that size, given you your own space, but you just cut it in half and said, I can't do that many. So this is important because people are going to get, you're going to get questions about this as we go down the road if you don't already have questions. Open space, yes, but we have not done it per unit. So there is not an open space per unit. We're defining that through basically setbacks and things and how much of the lot you can cover. Maximum building height is the same. I mean, if there's no height is a height. No change in how you measure it. It applies to everything, except it applies to everything the same way it does today. Maximum and building setbacks, still there. Minimum parking setbacks, still there. Maximum lot and building coverage, industrial only, because basically that is industrial. It's not usually carried over into the commercial areas. So what does this mean? I'll walk through an example in a minute. It means that, yes, we want residential character preserved. Yes, we want open space. Yes, we do not want to measure and regulate and have people check more boxes than they need to in order to get there. So you can see some of the boxes that came out and others that you can see that in many of these downtown residential only, there's some of these that still apply to residential because we care more about it there than you do in the mixed use and activity centers because they can contain a variety of different, they're not supposed to be all the same. It's downtown, it's an activity center, some big properties, some small properties. Yeah, there's a height limit, but we're not trying to micromanage the architecture. The feel of every building is between 25 and 50 feet wide. We don't care. It's an activity center. So that's philosophically what's going on here. Now, here's the case I wanted to make a minute ago. Maximum dwelling units per acre. This is the case. It forces buildings of a stated size and shape to contain fewer larger units than they otherwise could have, even if they could provide the parking spaces. So this is why communities are generally getting rid of that, even though, Clarion is saying we don't need density controls. The density controls are there. They're not in the form of an artificial dwelling units per acre number. And here are the examples. You have a 10 unit per acre limit that you got a half acre site and you got 10 dwelling units per acre. Okay, I can get 5 units and I got 5 parking spaces. Or market says, people need affordability. We could get 8 acres on there and park 8 cars and still meet the open space requirements. And that would be good for affordability. If we think that's too much of the lot occupied by parking, then talk about setbacks and talk about whether you're going to require that much parking, etc. But the point, this graphic is intended to say, for a building of the same size, it's the same size, and it's got the parking for the units at the same rate we would have done. A dwelling unit per acre often acts as a cramp because what do you do as a developer? I can only build a building this tall and it has to be this part, and I can only put 5-8 units in it. I will probably build bigger units and more expensive units. I would have liked to done 8 smaller, more affordable units, but you won't let me. And so that is the rationale behind getting rid of that number. Now in non-residential, we talked about last time, we're going to take a break in a minute here, in a minute. So I talked about dwelling units per acre for residential. This is maximum floor area ratios for non-residential. So again, we are not, we are recommending that in most cases that comes out because it's a very poor way to do building form. You guys have a Blueprint Boise talks a lot about the quality and the style and the design of development. And then you have a very sophisticated design review standard that is shaping buildings. FAR tends to be the analogy for non-residential, kind of an artificial cap. Even if you could build a building that met our numerical standards and the design review people thought it was a fine building, that's too much building on this site. It is usually used when it was developed, it was in the 60s and 70s as a suburban development, because once you know FAR, you can generate car counts. How many cars are going to be developed? In a downtown area, it is used sometimes and is often not used at all because it is by the time you get downtown, you have controls over these things. You have very good controls in Boise under the current system, and it turns out to be just an artificial constraint. So once again, it can force the building to be smaller in the height than setbacks would otherwise allow, even if there's adequate parking. Do we care that it fits in? Absolutely. You do that through setbacks and open space and height and form. Do we want to force it to contain less than it would have otherwise, even if it fits in? Clarion's argument is no, we actually don't. And so that is the rationale behind that. So 2 examples, and we'll take a break to talk about this. So we took an example, R1C today, which is, you know, a residential district, a standard residential district in Boise that has a lot of the cities platted and zoned as R1C. Here's what is in there today. Minimum lot area with separate numbers for these 2. Minimum average lot width with separate numbers for an interior lot and a corner lot. Maximum street frontage, maximum density units per acre, and maximum open space per unit. The proposal that is still under, and I've highlighted in red the things that we are trying to not carry forward because we don't actually think they're needed. So here we go. In the green box, without drawing a picture, because in R1C you can't just do a house. You have other things you can do. So, and we have it set on the numbers, although there hasn't been a lot of cry to change a lot of R1C to numbers. No change in the maximum building height. No change in the front, rear, or interior side setbacks. That means where your lot goes up against your neighbor's lot, no change. But they were still regulated, meaning they're regulated. You had the control before, you have the control now. Street side setbacks are reduced. The closeness you can get not to the front, but to the side street. Because frankly, the amount of space you're requiring from side streets in this area was higher than most communities would require. Relative to the front. It's not, you don't treat every side street setback as a front street setback in most codes. It does tend to drive up housing prices. Average lot width is reduced a little bit in that area. You could see what, we'll put it out there. And then the dwelling unit acres, I won't beat the drum any further, is reduced. So I have one more slide to go through that is an analogy in another area, but we're trying to talk about what this means and why would you do such a thing? Answer either A, we think it's belt and suspenders. You don't need both those controls. Or B, we're deliberately changing the controls or recommending that they be changed in the name of affordability, in the name of trying to get Boise to adjust to a much more difficult world to build and to afford housing in. So that's the things that are going on. And this is basically, and I want to repeat again, you can get the open space you need per lot through setbacks, through various, and of course, neighborhood step downs without having that be a number. But we may want to discuss whether you want it as a number. Let's talk non-residential. This is the C2 district, which is being converted into mixed use activity center. So if you hearken back to module 1, we kind of said there are 3 levels of activity centers. There's downtown, there's a neighborhood scale, small one, and then there's a medium size called activity center. If you really do remember from back there, there are actually 2 versions of this. Activity center, A and S, street oriented and activity, but we have decided to use A, the activity center, as the example. So here's what's measured today. Height setbacks, maximum building setbacks, which were new, minimum let's start parking setbacks, and then the 4 at the bottom. And as I said in the earlier slides, we are recommending that those ones at the bottom go out because they are unnecessary in activity centers. Once again, this is not citywide. I'm giving you an example, one example from a low density residential neighborhood and one from an activity center, and saying, how did it change? And the answer, because they're going to be in tables. That's how you describe them in the custom. So what does it all mean? Height stays, minimum building setback stays. In this case, for the sake of walkability and pedestrian action, there's a new thing called maximum building setbacks. And there are minimum parking setbacks. For the reason I said earlier, most communities in the name of walkability do not want the parking lots to dominate the street scene and be out in front against the sidewalk if they can avoid it. What goes out is a lot area, lot width. minimum street frontage, and the FAR for the reason I said earlier. So what does it mean in conceptual terms? Increased maximum building height from 45 to 55 feet in this area to encourage more intensity. Remember, part of what we're doing here is, in a lot of Blueprint Boise talks about activity centers, and the answer is, and we want them to support transit. In this case, in a mixed use activity center, there's a height increase. Reduced minimum and new setback buildings, reduced minimum and new maximum building setbacks to encourage more street-oriented development and transit-supported development. No minimum lot size limitations and frontage standards will allow the market to be more creative in how it meets it. Remember, this is an activity center. If you want to live in a house, you're not living in this activity center. If you want to live in multifamily, you could go into a multifamily zone, or you could live in an activity center, in which case you need to expect that you're in a mix of commercial and commercial and non-commercial. And so we're going to say, look, it's going to quack. It's going to be a lot like a commercial center. You chose to live there. We're happy you chose to live there, but we're not going to apply all the residential standards to people who choose to live in a business center. It's different. And then finally, the development intensity is governed by the building envelope, this invisible box, rather than the FAR number. So I think this is our questions at this point. It is difficult to walk through this. It might be easier if we could walk through a picture. Gee, Don, under the old code, you could do X, but under the new code is Y, and here's the picture of Y, and I don't like it. But we haven't settled on the numbers yet. So this discussion is about trying to simplify and promote affordability by conceptually removing the number of things that need to be measured and checked off. So I think I'll throw it open there, Andrea, for questions, or anybody who wants to say, gee, Don, you've confused me even more than before.
Byron, do you have a thought?
Yeah, just a quick question for Dawn. On the slides, it was hard to tell if the things that were in red were just for our notification or if they were going to be removed. But in the residential zones, are we still distinguishing, between interior lots and corner lots? Just wanted to check on that.
We are, but the recommendations say yes, but you do that by just saying, if you have a front setback, it's X. If you have a side setback, it's Y. So you do have a setback, which it doesn't make the lot wider. It doesn't force the lot to take up more land. It forces the building to be a little further from the street. So yes, you treat corner lots separately, but you don't need to do it with a different lot area or a different lot width. You do it through a different setback along a street side.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. What about like lot subdivisions?
You mean, I'm sorry, I need more detail. What's the question?
The establishment of lot sizes. So if we have a minimum lot size and do a land division, will the interior lots have different minimum lot areas or lot widths than corner lots?
Well, the proposal is no. The proposal is no, but you better plat it so that you can get a house or whatever building you want, keeping in mind that you've got a bigger setback on the side. So instead of forcing the whole lot up, we've said, won't force the lot. And I think this is typical around the country. Usually you don't have a lot of white, you don't make them do wider lots. You say, if you do a corner, you're gonna have to set it back further. So plat it accordingly if you want to, but, or design it for a smaller or a corner building that is not as big as you're doing on some of the other lots. That's all.
Yeah, okay, thank you, that helps.
This is Patrick. Related to that, I don't actually understand why you would want to have a larger setback on a corner lot unless it's like a visual thing about safety for bikers and such. Because isn't like the whole street like the space between buildings? You know, it's like kind of naturally there's a lot more space at that point than there is between buildings and interior. So what am I missing there?
It's a good point, Patrick. I want to be clear. If my lots are facing Main Street, they all have to have an X setback along Main Street. So there's no difference in the front setback on the street that you face. And that's always a tricky issue in every code. How do I tell which one I face? Now we're talking about the corner lot, not the Main Street, not the entrance, the side street. And the reason usually is that if you just left it the same, that side of that building that faces Main Street could come very close to, usually it's only it's a small setback. It could come very close to the street. Fine, I understand your point. Why do we care? It would promote affordability to let them do that. It's not really aesthetic. It's that behind that lot, one lot back from Main Street, usually in a residential neighborhood, There's a house facing the side street.
Oh, so a difference between the other front setback and what has become the side setback. Thank you. I knew that there was probably something there. Yeah.
The issue is if you let the guy facing Main Street have a very small side setback, then that becomes kind of annoying for his neighbor to the back, because that was his front yard, but now he's looking at the side of your building. And so most places do not say you must have 2 front setbacks, because that is a cost issue. They come up with a compromise, which is what we're proposing, which is that it doesn't have to be as far from it as it is the facing street, but it can't be, but you can't it can't be as close to the street as you could to
Sure.
online.
I appreciate that. I didn't think about that particular type of impact. I understand.
You can planners talking, unfortunately, I hate to admit this, for a while over glasses of beer as to how to solve that problem. And there is no right solution. You just find one. So. Anything else that people are concerned about or that were unclear? I talk fast and it's complicated. Yes, Kelly?
I'm still kind of struggling with on the minimum street frontage, how that relates to the size of the house. So, I guess is it just, do we have a minimum street frontage just to limit, is it to be, 5 or 10 feet back from the lot? And is it adjustable based off of the size of the building that's going to be put on? I'm trying to understand that ratio.
Sure. Usually minimum street frontages, to be honest, they came out of cul-de-sacs because, or let's say the minimum lot width in this area, a lot of older America was platted at 25-foot lots. Well, let's assume that this is a post-war and it's platted at a 50-foot wide lot. Fine. Does that 55, does that mean it has to be 50 feet wide at the point where it hits the street? And as we went into post-war era and we did cul-de-sacs, the answer was no, they can't be as wide. They're narrower where they hit the street. That's why we do, that's whether you like cul-de-sacs or not, that's how they work. There are a number of lots around a driveway and they get narrower as they get to the front of the lot. And they came out of people saying, but if I say it's a 50-foot wide lot, but it can be as narrow as it wants to be, we're going to have cul-de-sacs and curves. Curves are the same thing as cul-de-sacs. We're going to have a 25-foot lot of which 12 feet of it's taken up by a driveway. We don't want that. We don't want 50% of the street frontage to be taken up by driveways. So we say, when you lay out your lots, yes, you can make them narrower on curves or interiors of curves and things like that, but you can't make them too narrow, or frankly, sometimes the traffic guys want it separated because they don't want driveways right next to each other. That's kind of gone away. Usually it is because we don't want the whole street frontage to be driveways. These are front-loaded houses. And now there's another way to do it though. And I'm glad you asked the question, because another, again, this gets back to affordability. I could say minimum 25-foot street frontage. We have lots of different sizes, which make the ones in this neighborhood kind of like the other ones in this neighborhood enough that they feel good about what their neighbors are going to do, and it's not going to overcrowd them. And then we have a number, 50, and it gets down to 25. The other way to do that, to achieve the same goal, is to say no more than X percentage of your front lot can be occupied by driveway. So I'm not forcing your lot to be wider than it needs to be, but I am saying if you're going to do that, you're going to have a one-car driveway, or you're going to have a narrower driveway. We're not going to force the lot wider to accommodate a wider driveway. Let's let the designers do their job. And I don't want to just taint this conversation. Some people love cul-de-sacs, some people don't. It's just that the earth doesn't lay out in grids. Whether it should or not, it doesn't. And so there are curves. And the issue is, if you're concerned about pedestrian-oriented street frontage, the way to do that is to limit the amount of driveway you have, rather than by forcing the lot to be wider at the front than it needs to be. That's the philosophy.
Okay, that helps. I think if we talk about it more, and have some visuals to look at too, that'll help out as well.
Okay, all right, great. I can't watch what I'm doing and the chat. Are there any questions in chat, Andrea?
No, chat is clear.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. I have a question here. I just having a hard time finding my raise hand thing. So first of all, just make sure I'm understanding. On the left column over here, maximum open space per unit. Is that supposed to be maximum or should it be minimum?
It should have been minimum. I apologize. My
Okay.
typo. Thank you for being awake. I actually did it to see who'd ask me first. So thanks, Richie.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Just that I was having a hard time getting my brain around that
it's
one.
minimum. It's minimum. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And yeah, honestly, it's hard for me to understand the impact of removing that. I understand what you're saying, that the constraints are still there, or there are constraints there that will require such space. But it's harder to visualize unless you're visualizing an entire layout, right? Or entire. And I guess that same thing occurs with density. Is there a formula that you guys use? If you just plug in everything, then you can get an estimate of what density would be in the absence of having explicit density?
We can't do it at this point because I don't have real numbers yet. But Rich,
Right.
I think the answer to your question is, when staff has done its review and has kind of done, I think they're doing this informally, but probably what we should do at a future meeting is to say, now that staff feels comfortable with these numbers, let's see how many dwelling units per acre could be created on this site that compared to what might have been done under the cap that was there previously, and show you that. But we can't do it without numbers, and I don't have the numbers yet. So I mean, they're still under discussion. So I'm not trying to be coy. Your question is exactly the right question. Could I see a drawing of before and after? And the answer is, I can't give you one, but we could take something like R1C, which is very common in Boise, and say, let's do it. Let's take a 5-acre site or a 5-acre neighborhood that's being done. How many could you do before? How many could you do after? So we should do that at a future meeting. I'm agreeing with you.
Right. And then I imagine service providers would like to be able to have available such a formula, or maybe upper and lower upper bounds, I guess.
Well, we don't. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I mean, at some point, right? Because otherwise it's, I understand that things are still constrained. It's just harder for the average person to kind of understand.
Right.
Not what it looks like, because that's different, but in terms of, how many kids are going to be going to school or those kinds of things.
Well, I completely agree. And it is harder. Life got harder when we started doing mixed use, and it got harder when the problem with these regulations is that if you have too many of them, they never grant, they always take away. They always, I checked 6 boxes, but I couldn't do the 7th one. So I gotta put one less house on there. And so I guess my point is, yes, you're exactly right. Utility providers like to know, well, so how many houses of how many bedrooms are going to be there, or how many units of what size are going to be there, because I need to figure out sewer flows and water flows. And traffic guys love to have some of these measures because it helps them do the math. I think so your comment is exactly right, but I think the fair answer is to say, we're getting smarter about how much regulation is needed to protect neighborhood character. I said these things, but it's about neighborhood character, which I think Boise citizens care about a lot, and affordability. And so we're kind of rethinking it. And frankly, the answer to your upper bound is we could do it, but the needle is kind of moved with the seriousness of the affordability issue, saying the predictability of traffic counts and utility flows should not be driving the fabric of our cities. It's driving costs up. We would rather make it more affordable and then rethink, okay, then what do we do with traffic? We don't know if it's going to be fewer units or fewer larger units. And the answer is that's a traffic projection problem. And the folks who do that have to get smarter and make some assumptions. There is no formula, Rich, but they have formulas. If it's a mixed use in this kind of a context, let's assume it's going to be 60% residential and 40% non-res, whatever they do. I've worked with them on that. You have to go back and scratch your head and say, okay, we need to figure out traffic flows in a different way. We need to figure out sewer and water flows in a different way. But the philosophy is, the right way to make that more predictable in terms of urban services is not to drive up the cost of housing by artificially holding down the densities. I mean, it's a measurement problem. I understand. I'm explaining the reasoning behind it. So I agree. By the way, I didn't answer Byron's first question, which is the red was intended to indicate things that are coming out. So minimum lot area regulations stay in. The separate numbers for interior and corner come out. That's what that's supposed to mean. And the bottom one's come out. Let me just put this out because it's very important, guys, and it will be I predict it will continue to be a topic up until the day that City Council makes a decision on the new ordinance. The deletion of open space per unit is going to be troubling to some people, even though Don says, and we show some examples and say, look, it's not much more dense, or it is more dense, but in a way that's politically acceptable. Yeah, that's a price we are willing to pay for our contribution to the affordable housing challenge. There are, even though we try to make that case, there are going to be people saying, why are you making this so hard? Why don't you just say every house has to have 360 square feet of open space? Or every apartment, common in some codes, every apartment has to have 100 square feet of open space. The issue is on site. That's the issue. If you force it onto the site, you can, you are driving costs up, because I could have done this, but for the fact that I had to have 200 or 100 or 300 square feet of open space on each site, or I had to have 100 on a balcony or on a patio that is related to this apartment house. As the affordability challenge has gotten harder and harder, and we don't seem to be making much traction on it, a number of newer ordinances have said, we need to figure this out. For example, in subdivision, newer ones say, okay, you need open space. Kids and adults need open space. It is not true that we all want to live in Manhattan. We don't all even want to live in Denver. We want open space. That's why we moved here. But we don't have to require it on site. We can say, and I've written some ordinances recently that say, you got to have open space, but it has to be within X feet of each dwelling unit. You figure it out, Mr. Designer, because having it nearby could be much more cost efficient than having it on each site. And so that, yes, aren't you paying for it either way? Sure you are. But you may be holding down the cost of the individual dwelling units, and you may be able to assemble that shared open space near the residential units much more efficiently than you could say it's got to be on each site. And that's one of the reasons why it's coming off as a look, just as we have to think harder about traffic, we need to think harder about open space, guys. It's kind of simplistic. Got a house? Give me this much spot on your lot. So we don't have to do it. As a matter of fact, I'm sure will have opinions once you see the draft as you go out, and some people will say, I don't like it at all. Go back to the old way. But that's the rationale behind it. So, Patrick?
I just want to add, in addition to the affordability points that you've made, from a usability standpoint, I think there's strong advantages to that consolidated model. 360 square feet on every little lot, it's might just be a little sad patch of grass that is hard to do very much with, versus a bigger space that could be a park or what have you, that has ability to be used for recreation by all users and some nature benefits, etc. So it's less fragmented, and I think the less fragmented piece of it is better for its own sake.
Andrea, I don't want to cut anything off. It's complicated stuff, but I wanted this group in particular to be aware of the trade-offs that are inheriting these recommendations. So
we are seeing some comments in the chat. So Roberta has said that she agrees with Patrick, and then Byron has elaborated to say, to the open space requirement, many architects and designers would support the notion that well-designed open space of possibly smaller area functions better than underutilized raw area, even when you take into account uses for plant and animal life. Space is a premium in the city, and it must be carefully managed.
We're about an hour into this. We can keep taking chats or conversation, but this was about when we were going to take a short break. I think that's the next slide is a short break. And there we go. And then we have 4 much shorter topics that, to be honest, I think are more fun than this and you know, more fun to discuss, but we wanted to cover 4 things. Shall we take a break now, Andrea, for 5 minutes?
Yep, Francis has just said, great point, Byron. And then on that, we can take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back and talk about some of the things that we have included rather than the things that we have excluded.
Great. Be back in a few minutes. Thanks. Go back.
All right, looks like it's been about 5 minutes for our stretch and break. Dawn, have you returned?
Yeah, yes, I have. Excuse me. I'll be right there. All right.
All
You want to,
right,
should we pick it up and move on?
let's
All right.
do it.
All right. So let's see if I can do it. There we go. Can you see it?
We are in good shape.
All right. Which view are you seeing?
We're seeing the right view this time.
Don't- Give me a second then to get it in front of me now that you can see it. All right, there you go. All right, so are we at the first stage or are we back at questions on yours?
We see dimensional standards, key concepts.
All right, good. So let's go back to where we were before. There we go. All right, so, all right, several topics. They're shorter, but we'd like to make sure you have a chance to comment on them. So incentives. I talked about this a little bit at a prayer meeting, but among the various many goals of Blueprint Boise is promoting more sustainable and resilient development. How do you do that? So you will see when module 2 is released, there are a lot of different ways to do it. And the only one I want to talk about today is sustainable and resilient development, and the incentive. So one of the two key incentives, you already have housing incentives. The one that's the other one that we haven't talked about is sustainable resilient development. In general, this allows in most of the mixed use and special purpose districts, frankly, not the 50% parking reduction in residential districts. So how do you incent it in residential development? The draft says, the recommendation says through parking reductions. Because we didn't want to increase heights more than we thought would fit in with the neighborhood. On the other hand, in mixed use and in special purpose districts, which are not low density residential districts, a 10-foot increase, another floor of height. So we're seeing this approach used in other medium-sized cities around the country, but basically each one is different. So what do we mean by it? Easy to say the words. What zoning can actually do is work on about 5 things, and I'm just going to give you a little background. Mixed use, we got it. It's in the activity centers in module 1. We can get it more about mixed use, reduces building traffic and bicycle and walking trips because people have options to make the trip shorter by living in a mixed use area. And it's a big thing. Walkability, connectivity, just talked about the fact, well, I'll talk about it after in the next slide, but ways for sidewalks, trails, things, and neighborhoods to have more connectivity. That's the second thing. Energy conservation and renewable energy, water conservation, and food and urban food. There's a 6th one out there and it's called rubbish and trash and recycling. We think we got the rubbish and trash recycling in module 1. We have urban food in module 1. And we've talked mixed use already. So I want to focus on these things. What would you reward people for doing? So basically building orientation and pre-wiring. The draft says you reward people in these ways for pre-wiring buildings for solar and renewable energy. You don't have to do it because sometimes it won't work and sometimes it's expensive, but to put the wiring in and the conduits and the capacity to handle solar collectors at the time you build a building is a lot cheaper than trying to retrofit it later. So having that ready allows it to have an incentive. Using renewable energy sources is another way to do it. Green infrastructure, meaning on-site stormwater retention, is another way you reward that. And water efficient irrigation, meaning low water use, things that take substantially less water use than they otherwise would have. So I'm going to try to draw something up here. I've said it in a general way, but I'm going to say it in a more specific way if I can. Just a second. Let's see if I can figure it out. And then the bottom is green certification. So this slide sounds like they're all 5 together, but basically in each of the 4 bullets at the top, the draft says you can earn these bonuses in these districts if you do the following targets. They are numeric targets. You are handling at least X% of your energy needs through renewables that you install on site. You are handling at least 30% of the stormwater runoff from a 100-year storm on site. So it's not a free-for-all. There are numbers behind each one that say basically you need to meet some targets. And the way it's drafted is simply that there are a list of 7 things and you need to do 4 of them. You don't have to do all 7. You can choose which of the 4 things you can do. And that's the top 4. So there's seven different numbers. You'll see them when the draft's released. And you don't have to do them all. You have to do 4 of them. And if that's true, you earn either a 50% parking reduction or a 10% height increase, depending on the zone district you're in. The last bullet is different. It says, as an alternative to doing 4 out of 7 things, you can meet a given certification in LEED or the Livable Building Challenge. LEED is the best known one. It's a rating system for sustainability. There are 4 others out there that we've run into. There are more than that, actually, that are commonly used, that basically the ordinance says you don't have to do 4 out of 7 if you get a certification from any one of these 4 different national rating systems on sustainability, or another rating system that we don't know about today that emerges 5 years from now, that the director believes will have the same effect as if you had equal sustainability values to meeting those standards in the 4 named rating systems. So 4 named rating systems. Have you named them all? Nope, they'll come up with another one, and they keep it revolving. So you could come in and say, guess what, I'm doing the new one. My corporate strategy is to build them according to this standard. Can you have it? Well, if the director says, I think that's doing as much good as if you got a certification under LEED. So that is how it works. I just want to understand it's a 2-way system. You want to check the boxes? Check the boxes. You want to get certified? Get certified. Either way works. I do want to point out that for the sake of predictability, almost all new ordinances and this draft say your eligibility is determined when you turn in your application. So you don't horse trade them. In return for X, you get one of these 2 things. If it is something that goes forward for an approval by a higher body, it's not an administrative decision. It's going to go to Planning Commission. It's going to go to council for some reason. The draft says they are supposed to review it based on whether it meets the criteria in the code. They are not supposed to go back and say, well, the building needs to be a floor shorter. You earn the right to have your development processed with the bonus when you commit and you design it that way. And that is not supposed to be a negotiation. There's not a PUD. Oh, well, I'm almost doing this, so I should get a benefit. So that is the approach to make it more objective, to make it not a subject of negotiation, because it gets extremely messy. But basically, that's the approach. So I'm going to open it up for I'm going to say, do we have questions about that approach? Apparently not.
Can we also make comments?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Questions, comments. There's a distinction.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Go ahead.
So there's to me a little bit of a tension between holding one, in my view, strongly environmentally friendly reform. Hostage is a strong word, but in order to reduce your parking, you have to do additional things when parking is aligned with the goals of the other things you want to achieve. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions, decreasing permeable surface, et cetera, et cetera, all localized pollution, the whole thing. And I get how you can kind of, given that the environmental stuff is probably achievable to hit 4 of those 7 in a variety of contexts, that you'll probably end up in a situation where you get 2 good things rather than 0. But we are holding 1 good thing for the environment and affordability, et cetera, kind of in reserve to get even more, is one way that I view that.
Okay. So, but you raise a big question. What should be the reward? Well, first of all, we think in module 2, we have done a number of things throughout when we talk about sensitive lands, when we talk about parking, which I'll talk about in a minute, frankly, to make things more sustainable and resilient. So you could decide we're not going to give anything. It ought to be in the base standards. Everybody does it. Most communities come out and say, well, do what you can in the base standard. There'll be pushback on that. And most communities like carrots rather than sticks. So let's offer some carrots in addition to doing lower parking, whatever we're doing. So the threshold question, I don't want to take too much time on this, as I think what Patrick's raising is, should we be rewarding, should we be our reduced parking and increased height the right carrots? We're trying to make it simple and understandable. Another height of building in a mixed use zone is a substantial financial incentive. Reduced parking, well, if you had already reduced the parking a lot, maybe it's not so much. But the question is, what should the carrots be if there are going to be carrots?
Since I started that comment, I like the increased height a lot. I want the parking reduced one way or the other. I just wanted it to be always reduced and then use the increased height as the bonus or what have you, versus only reduce it in this circumstance. That was so I want to be very careful on my wording on that.
No, I get it. And I'm not trying to put you in a box. The reason we didn't offer height in the residential zone, we could offer height in the higher intensity residential zones, but the point is, we didn't want to offer height in the R1B and R1C, where it's kind of a 35-foot neighborhood, because the difference between a 2.5-story house and a 3.5-story house, all heck may break loose in the neighborhood. That's different. You can't, in a low-density residential neighborhood, you got to figure out something that is, in most neighborhoods, if you want to do it, that's great. But in most places, like, no. We're not going from 2.5 stories to 3.5 stories in a residential neighborhood. So I think Rich had his hand up next.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, thanks. Well, this just brought up a question. So what happens, and I'm not necessarily having an opinion one way or another on this, but what happens in terms of shading if you get increased heights and somebody has a solar installation and then somebody else gets maybe a bonus, so that wasn't kind of a predictable thing for the people who installed the solar on one building. Is that, I mean, and maybe it's not an issue just with one floor or whatever, but how do you kind of govern access to
solar rights?
Solar rights. Yeah, there you go. You've thought about it.
Ask me an easy one, Rich. That's a tough one. The short, we can partially address it in the regulations. I've seen a lot of tests. Denver did a lot of tests when they came up with their zoning ordinance in 2010. I was not involved, where they concluded that in most mixed-use developments, mixed-use zone districts, if the property to the north was wider than some number, 50 or 60 feet wide, which is a very typical, we've taken out the minimum, but a 50 or 60 foot wide commercial lot is not uncommon in new development or activity center development. A floor of you didn't have to worry about solar access except in the depth of winter, and then you do. So, but the bottom line is, for most development, the conclusion I've seen in a lot of the studies is, if it's a very narrow lot and the house to your north is very close to you, you could have a problem. If it's a reasonably sized lot and it's a reasonably sized setback, you probably won't have a problem. That doesn't answer your question. So we could deal with that in terms of setbacks. When you get beyond that, there are communities that have done it. I have not written it into this draft yet, but I'm taking your question as a request that we think of doing it. It is, most communities do not say either you can go a floor higher if you get the consent of the guy to the north that he's never going to put he doesn't mind if you do it because you didn't plan to put a solar collector on there. They do not do that because that requires you to get a neighbor's consent for something. It's not property rights. It's smiling at your neighbor and hoping he likes you. The other thing they don't say that you, as a person who might someday put solar on your building, have a right to prevent your neighbor to the south from adding a floor to their building. Very few communities have done that. A few have, very few have done it. They usually, when they do this kind of thing, if they're worried about shading, they try to they encourage informally through the application process a conversation about it, but they do not either let the northern or the southern person prevent their neighbor from doing what they think is in the interest of the environment. So that's a very mushy answer, Rich, but it gets complicated very fast. And in general, most cities do not make the condition of an additional story contingent upon somebody's agreement that might get shaded by the additional story.
Yeah, thanks. And I can see how it certainly, becomes a very big question and has lots of tentacles. Yeah, I just in the context of what we were just talking about in terms of rewards, maybe it's an easier thing to address, but maybe not. I don't know. So thank you.
I want to get into Ian a bit, but I do want to point out one thing which I did not say so far, which is this. When you draft this, you say you can go a floor higher for doing a good thing. But remember what we said earlier? If you are near a home, a single family home, you have to step it down. And well, which wins, my extra floor of bonus or the neighbor? And the answer in that case is the neighbor. So that if you are close to a single family or two family or 35-foot house, you can use the bonus, but you may need to whack off some of the part of that floor or maybe you're lucky you're farther away. So I do want to point out the worst case scenario is, I happen to be next to a commercial site and I am a little 2-story house over here. And the answer is, when that happens, the code says the little house wins. You're going to you can use part of it or some of it or set it back or move it away, but you can't use the bonus as a way to get away from the neighborhood protection for the small scale neighborhood. So, Ian.
Yeah, I have some firsthand experience with that working in another city where they actively encouraged you to do solar. And I was working with a client on a project and they actually went for an additional a height increase, an additional story, and they had a neighbor to the north of them that had solar panels. And so they had to then negotiate with that neighbor, and it was a whole ordeal. So it does get quite gray and squishy and difficult. So I think what Don was recommending towards the end of that, the neighbor has some, the residential house or residential building has some, preference over the commercial 1-story increase. That makes sense to me. To the previous question, I would say, carrots or sticks. I think both. The right carrots and the right sticks are good. One particular incentive that I've experienced working here is expedited review. Time is money, and when you have a project in for review at the city, the city is quite busy. So getting shortened review period by meeting some of these green requirements, that saves money and it helps the project.
Good thought. It's interesting. 10, 20 years ago, people would raise that issue. And I said, I don't know any city that's not doing them as fast as they can. But, the truth is, in the boom in economy we've been since 2010 or 2012, it does make a difference. And that's worth considering. Andrea's probably slicing her hand across the throat saying, no, I can't do it any faster. I can't run any faster. So anyway, that's a valid thought. It's becoming increasingly relevant just because development gets harder and harder and more complicated. So I had one other thought there. I will think about this. This is not a recommendation, and I do not claim that it is a practice commonly used around the country. I don't know yet. Just as we say, if you've got commercial next to a house and you're earning the extra bonus, you better cite it so that you don't violate the step downs for the house. That's fine. Maybe you can, but we know you're in conflict. The neighbor wins. The small scale house wins. You could, and I bet I can find examples of places that say that same principle applies if your neighbor has already installed solar. If they've had already installed solar, then you need to step your extra floor back 10 feet or something like that. Because not that they might, because they might not. Most people don't. If they already have, we still give you the floor, but we acknowledge that is a value of the community, just like protecting low density residential neighborhoods. And we say, then you need to allow this guy more sunlight. don't make them negotiate. The code should not make you enter into horse trading with your neighbor. That's a terrible principle of government, but you can accommodate it by cutting them some slack. So anyway. Unless somebody has something else, I see something in the chat, but absolutely agree with expedited review. Good, great. Administrative review versus public hearing came in too from Byron. Andrea, I am talking more and we're getting good comments, but is it time to move on to the next one?
No, if everybody's comfortable, I think we can move on.
All right. I will do so as soon as I get my cursor in the right place. Access and connectivity. I want to raise just two things here, guys. It's complicated. I've tried to put it on one slide, and we want to get to two issues after this. So there are a lot of carry forwards, partly because ACHD has standards and it's hard to get away from them, and their standards are their standards. We have some changes to the cul-de-sac standards. We have maximum block lengths. So I want to focus basically. I don't want to talk about the first bullet. We'll talk about the rest of them. So there are new requirements for sidewalks, bikeways, multi-use paths, connections designed to ACHG standards. There are cross-access standards when you have a new development, not a retrofit, a new mixed-use development or non-residential uses. You got two parcels. They're not single-family neighborhoods. They're two parcels. Do you have to provide a connection to the next adjacent parcel for the sake of circulating between parking lots or between buildings, or walking without having to go out to the street and come back in, or drive out to the street and come back in? The draft says you need to lay them out. I can't make Ian give me an easement for his people to go across. You can't do that, unfortunately. It's very hard. Can't you make them? Answer, the corporate guy for Chick-fil-A says, we are not given an easement for people to drive into McDonald's across our property. We're not going to. They're going to run into each other and sue us instead of McDonald's. They were going to McDonald's. They weren't even eating at Chick-fil-A. And so the bottom line is, it is very hard to force that to happen. But what codes do is to say, you need to build it as if it's going to happen. The odds are good that they will reach some sort of an agreement because it could be mutually beneficial. That's one of the requirements. Maximum block length is simply super blocks are cheaper, or bigger blocks are cheaper. There's less pipes, less roads, less length, but they raise biking and parking. So there is in here a maximum block length. If you're new, what it says is, I'm platting a new block, and next to me, by an objective measure, most of the land's been subdivided, and their blocks average X in length and width. I need to lay mine out so that they're about within 25% of that. It can be a little higher, it can be a little lower. You got to respond to terrain, but you can't go next to a walkable neighborhood with smaller lots and do a super block. That's not for the sake of reducing your infrastructure cost. If that area, this is character, if that area has a walkable character based on a lot block framework, you need to be close to that. And if you're not near development, it's raw land and you are among the early guys, then there are numbers which are based on kind of average urban block dimensions plus 25%, something like that. Say, you've got a blank slate here, guys, but you need to try to make it more walkable and bikeable with smaller blocks that allow more interconnections. Now, I'll be first to admit, Don, you don't get it. Roads drive up costs. Yes, they do. The goal of affordable housing runs into the goal of walkability, no doubt about it. But that's the approach that the draft is taking is, yeah, well, this is an area where there's some trade-offs. And then cul-de-sacs, you can see the drawing here, that if you're at the bulb of a cul-de-sac and you don't back up on another cul-de-sac, but you back up on a street of a certain, not a local, but a arterial or collector street, you need to do a pedestrian connection. I don't know if I've raised this with you guys before. Most advocates of walkability love it because it's much more likely you're going to walk than if you had to walk around the whole block. Developers do not like it often, really don't like it, because the number of people that they perceive that the number of people who want to buy those two lots that are next to the walkway is lower. People don't want why would I want strangers walking through my side yard? So this will be controversial, but I wanted to highlight it again in case anybody wanted to comment on it. Questions?
It looks like Kelly has her hand raised.
Okay, Kelly.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that I really like the pedestrian access and walkability and so forth. So I'm all for it. Give it a gold star.
Okay, all right. I see Byron's hand up.
Byron, yeah.
Yeah, no questions. Just wanted to agree with Kelly there. Additional connection, especially pedestrian and bike connection from public ways into developments and around housing is all great with me. I love it.
And then we have Richard.
Yeah, likewise, I think connectivity and whatever you call it, permeability for pedestrians and cyclists is great. I'm not a fan of more roads and calling it, to make more walkable, shorter block sizes or whatever, where it doesn't necessarily fit the character and having lived in LA when the apps for, finding your best commuting route became more and more available. Cut through traffic for certain places just becomes terrible when you do increase that car connectivity at times. So I'm a big fan for the pedestrians and the cyclists, but not a fan of making bigger pavement, access for vehicles. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
And then we have Damon.
Just chiming in, agreeing with the sentiment that others have expressed about, I just highly favor, that pedestrian access. And not only towards roads, but as Byron mentioned, towards, other pedestrian amenities like trails. I think of the Greenbelt a lot. There are certain sections. This is more Garden City than, say, City of Boise, but as there's more development along the river, as somebody that has lived or has friends in those neighborhoods and then wants to get to the river, it can be really challenging if all those cul-de-sacs end and there ends up being illegal trespassing anyways. So having designated areas where the neighbors can put up privacy fences if they want, and then pedestrians can access those rights of way, I just highly favor. So thanks.
Let me mention one thing before we go. I think we have two more speakers, but I didn't put a bullet on here, but the draft does say it lists certain things that frankly the city can require pedestrian connection in the context of new layout of lots. You can't retrofit it, but when the lot layout, when you're reviewing a subdivision, if the director determines that it's necessary for access to a school, a park, a trail, open space. So that is in there. It's tricky to draft right because there's law about that. But in fact, many cities have done it. So my point is I've listed some things, but there's something that's not on here, which is called the director say, hey, let them get to the park. You don't capture that park. That's a public park. You need to let them get there. So.
All right, Brad.
As usual, I'm going against the grain. I think it's a bad idea. I mean, what's the point of a cul-de-sac? I think cul-de-sac brings privacy. That's why you move into them. And, like the example of access to the river. I mean, that's just going to create people parking in the cul-de-sac and walking to the river. It's just, I don't like the idea of it. I prefer privacy myself. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we have Hillary.
I am a voice in support of pedestrian and biking ways, but there's just a couple of things I wanted to mention, a couple of counterpoints. So I rarely hear in my line of work developers complaining about sort of the edge lot that has to be next to the walkway. There are lots of ways that developers can deal with that through landscape buffers, fencing requirements, orientation. I mean, that can be managed. What I most frequently hear are complaints about requirements for walkways that are effectively a road to nowhere. Areas where that connectivity is never going to be established through a neighboring property, or is, you know, the neighboring property is already very well and long established as a commercial or other residential development that doesn't have connectivity. So you end up with essentially useless space, which goes back to Byron's point earlier that, you know, space is at a premium, and so it needs to be planned and used well and utilized. And the other point is that in some areas, we should have standards to make sure that those walkways are lighted. Safety concerns are sort of top of mind whenever you have pedestrian alleyways.
That is a
Well
good
lit.
thought.
Sure, sorry, well lit. My goodness.
We get it. Yeah.
And that's a great thought, Hillary. In fact, as we have been developing the trails plan, the pathways and trails plan throughout the city of Boise, we're trying to wrap that up at the end of August, but we actually have just scheduled a meeting with the Parks and Recreation Department, planning, as well as Public Works, so we can talk about effective lighting, how we can make it so that it's effective, doesn't adversely impact other neighbors, that it is safe. But we also need to take into account both human and animal cycles. So we can impact their sleep cycles, reproduction cycles, those types of things. So we're trying to figure out a really good way to do a lot of those things. I did want to follow up with you on Hillary when you said pathways to nowhere. I'm assuming developers are comfortable when they have to build a pathway that is temporarily nowhere, as long as it's in a plan and it's going to happen and it will go somewhere in the future. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been the issue. I've seen developers say, why are you requiring this? It literally will never change. Like, this is not, I can't do anything about this, and I'm not designing my current plan now to accommodate a hope and a prayer 20 years down the road. That, like, there has to be some, you know, at least a reasonable expectation that that connection is going to link up to something and it's going to provide useful access at a very, you know, in a very recent future.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. And then Byron?
Thank you, Andrea. Sorry, Dawn, I did actually have a question now that we've been talking about this a little bit. Is there a way to incentivize some of our existing poorly planned or poorly connected neighborhoods, specifically our subdivision neighborhoods with a lot of cul-de-sacs, a lot of pathways and roads to nowhere, like Hillary said? When they come out, and I guess the only time they'll touch base with the city in the future there is really if they're looking for further land division or things like that. Are there other city codes that kind of address existing neighborhoods and incentivizing, you know, increased connectivity over time?
Not much, Byron. It's hard for a couple of philosophical reasons. It's not philosophical, overarching reasons. One is when you try to retrofit the past and make it better. For example, let's just, for the sake of discussion, try to say, why couldn't we go back into these neighborhoods and get a path through an existing cul-de-sac to existing street? What you're actually asking is for somebody to pull out their wallet and do something, either give up land or build something. And zoning can almost never make you do that. And so you at the time you're laying it out, you try to get it right. The question, it's twofold. Usually it's very rare for zoning to go back and make you come into contact. When you come for an approval, they can ask you to mitigate your impact. So for example, what if on the example that's drawn on the screen, that top lot that has the walkway on the south side of it, or on the lower side of it, what if that was one lot and they came in and said, but we're big enough to be two lots. We want to subdivide and do two lots. Well, technically they're coming in and asking the city to approve something. And in principle, the city could say, well, we'd like you to put a walkway along there, the edge of the side of the thing. But it's hard to, technically, there's a lot of law on that says, nay, that's not his problem to solve. That's a city problem to solve. The city can buy it. The city can try to talk the developer into doing it. You can do a lot of things, but you can't put on the burden of a particular, usually the developer's long gone. So you're talking to individual property owners, none of which can be required to bear at their own expense to solve a problem that is actually a citywide or a neighborhood-wide issue that they didn't create. So the short answer is it's hard. It probably can't do it. So
That's what I thought. Thanks, Don.
yeah.
Okay, Richard.
I don't mean to have my hand up. I'm sorry if I do.
All right.
Nope,
Let's go.
you're good.
Let's go to the next one if we can, Andrew. We got a little bit more to plow, a little more ground to plow. Two topics, but one of them might have some discussion. The next one less, I think. But ready to go?
Sure.
All right, good. I will. Oh, come on.
And actually, while we're getting there, we've had quite a bit of chat. So I think it'd be really good to go back and make sure that we're covering all that so everybody's seeing those types of things. So Shellen has said that Ian's point earlier on was very accurate, that expedited review of building permits are a huge bonus here in Boise. Incentivizing for expediting entitlements also works in other jurisdictions. For example, if you do X or Y, we'll give you a review, we'll complete your review, an entitlement or building package within 30 days or something.
Mhm. Okay.
And Patrick said, I'm really skeptical of requiring buildings to be smaller in order to protect a light for a solar panel. I suspect if you did the math, the climate benefits due to reduced heating needs alone of another attached unit in the new building may outweigh the net electric benefit of given solar panels. Ian has said another consideration shouldn't be some of the onus be on the property owner to know what height your neighbor can and cannot build. And he agrees with Richard that more walkways and less roadways. Patrick says he agrees with all. Ben has said that he agrees with the expedited approvals as a carrot. Richard is thankful for us thinking about the impact on night lighting to wildlife. And Patrick has said reasonable probability of successful connection. So
Yeah. Okay.
now we're all caught up and we
Great.
can move on.
Well, that's true. And I, though we didn't have a bullet to the last point that was made before we went into the chat, I believe the draft says, and I usually draft these to say, if the director can adjust the connectivity requirement, if in fact, I like Patrick's word, there's no reasonable probability this is going to serve a public purpose. It's impracticable. You can't do it. There's a huge grade change and nobody could get up and down that in the winter anyway. Or there's utilities but a lot and a major road plan through there, and it doesn't make any sense to do that. So there is usually some flexibility built in there where the director says, you're right, this is going nowhere. And it is technically yes, in practice, no. I have the ability to waive it based on objective standards that you put into code. So let's go to the next one. I don't want to do, I think we've talked about this. I think we want to go in, I'm going to get to the next one because it's parking. This is important for people to understand. We can go, if we have time, I'll go back to the last one. I should have covered it first. Here's a map. You guys that know the code or understand this map. The dark gray is P1. That is the core of your downtown, and there are no parking standards. It is like many downtowns. It is market driven. You can provide parking or not provide parking, but it's not required by the city. In the next lighter shade of gray is P2. They have reduced parking requirements, not waived, lower than they could be, lower than they would otherwise be in the unshaded parts of this map. So dark gray, you don't have to do it. Next shade of gray, you got to do less. Lightest shade of gray, P3, you can do even less. And then we go to the standard parking requirements that are applicable to that multifamily or whatever. So this is in your code today. Upon reflection, staff, consultant and staff have gone through and said, we are recommending reductions in base parking requirements based on comparing your rates to other cities and understanding this is not Denver. It's certainly not Chicago. It's a Western city that is largely car oriented and wanting to be less so. So when we have taken the white area in most of Boise and reduced the rates, less so for residential than for others, but have reduced them not based on making up numbers, but based on comparing them with what other cities do. And upon review, and then we on the first draft said, okay, so now that we've reduced this, what do we do with the light gray and medium gray? Should we try to triangulate and say, well, it's low out in the rest of the city. There's none downtown in P1. Maybe we should just adjust this gradation so they're two kind of, well, P3 has to do, a little bit less, and P has to do a little bit less. Just adjust the sliding scale to match the fact that the standard parking requirements went down, as Patrick has advocated several times. Upon reflection, that was making it too complicated. So a draft, as it's going to come forward at this point, says keep the dark gray, get rid of the light gray and the medium gray. They are the differences between that and the standard city parking ratios that are recommended outside the core don't justify the complexity of a sliding scale. And to be honest, this map is unusual. Most cities do that. There are core intense areas that are market driven and their standards. But I want to be very clear, it's not as simple as it sounds. So for example, there could be in the white areas, there are standards, fine. There are also reductions if you share uses. That's good because they don't all have to park in all the spaces all the time. There are reductions if you're near a transit center. There are reductions for a whole variety of things. So white is not one size fits all. White is a number that is adjusted up and down based on the need for parking, the availability for parking, the availability of transit. So white is a lower number than today with adjustments, and the recommendation coming forward is in light of that alternative system, we don't need medium gray and light gray. So I see that Ian has his hand up.
So maybe I misunderstood, but you're essentially saying that with the existing parking reductions for the area in white, adding an additional reduction in the P2 and P3 zones would just complicate matters or would further reduce it?
It reduces it, and the amount of difference between light gray and medium gray gets to be to the point where you scratch your head and say, I'm not sure this is worth the trouble.
Got it. Okay. No, thanks for the clarification. I guess my counterpoint to that is why not just increase the P1 area to encompass P2 or even P3? I don't know, just throwing that out there.
Oh, it's a valid comment. I'm not going to put Andrea on the spot, except I'm going to put Andrea on the spot. Have you guys talked about that?
We have. So we have taken a look at the downtown planning area and say, what is reasonable? And we know that our downtown area is intended to have on-street parking or parking garages. So I think as new parking garages are built further as we move to the west, I think you will see that parking overlay expand relatively significantly. And if you're following the chat, Drew has asked that too. Hey, can we increase that P1? That is a possibility. I think the city will take a really good look at that. But if we right size the parking citywide, and then just say, well, we know that the downtown area doesn't need additional parking. So, and then also I wanted to touch base. Patrick has noted that St. Paul, Minnesota, with a population of 311,000, just eliminated all of their parking minimums yesterday. So,
well, they just didn't want to. They didn't want to be shamed by Minneapolis. Is what happened there. So. No, it's a good point. Patrick has raised this very politely many times. It is happening. It's not happening everywhere, but there is a stream of cities who have said, particularly for commercial and multifamily and mixed uses, we're not going to regulate this anymore. Will it? And there is a fair chunk of evidence in my mind, except where the overflow would go into low density residential neighborhoods, that it works out just fine. The market is actually able to figure this out. Any other comments? Thanks, Patrick, for the reminder. I did not know they did that yesterday, but that's good. So.
Drew has his hand up.
Thanks. I think you maybe just kind of phrased my question, Don, is there room to explore that here? Being mindful of where it flows over into low density neighborhoods. I think we've got a couple zones on the table, the mixed use zoning, R3 potentially, where do we not have the faith that the market could figure that out?
Well, I have less faith that the market will figure it out in areas that are adjacent to R1B, R1C, low density zoning, because I think there are market incentives to say, I could, my last restaurant needed X parking spaces. I'm relocating my new restaurant. I have every reason to believe my new restaurant's going to need the same number of parking spaces per square foot. But this site can't accommodate that. And you know what? They can just park a block away in the neighborhood and walk in here. Well, yeah, it's fine for the restaurant, not so fine for the neighborhood. So, but I think getting at your point, I cannot point you to an example, but one of the logical options you could explore is we're getting rid of parking unless you are within 500 feet of a low density residential zone district. Then you got to do it. Here's what you got to do, because we're not concerned about commercial uses and mixed uses sharing parking or figuring out about among themselves. We are concerned about overflow parking in the neighborhoods, frankly. So it could be a distance. Instead of saying, yeah, I mean, so Don, who's doing this? I don't know. But instead of saying, we have a number that everybody has to meet, and then we have an exception for downtown, which is by far the norm around the country. There's no logical reason you could say, why don't we not do this? And we have an exception for areas where people who have made a choice to live in single family neighborhoods or low density neighborhoods, there's an equity issue there, right? I mean, people who live in apartments get to deal with the fact that the market could screw up. People who live in houses get the protection that it won't screw up near them. So there is an equity issue, but that happens all the way through the code. Aren't you treating single family, low density residential neighborhoods better than other people? Well, yeah, it does. So there's an equity issue you'd have to have a discussion about. So. Any other questions? I see the chat thing is up. Is there anything we need to review for that? I see. Okay, P1, I guess it's the same thing that have already been mentioned. So, Andrea, anything more before we go to the last topic?
No, Patrick did have his hand up, but he may have gotten it. Pat?
I know I've spoken a bunch, but Don, one thing we touched on last time, since we're talking about solutions for that border zone, which is permit parking.
Yep, right.
You can make it free to the residential person, their home, whatever, boom, without having to affect the stuff on the other side. So you could, I don't know. It seems more elegant to me by aligning incentives, but
Well, it is in ways more elegant. Andrea, have you talked about that? Because the issue there is the administrative burden of doing that, basically, that the city has to kind of monitor that, manage permits. They have to, they can do it. They do it all over the country. But it is often the city who has to say, well, all right, we'll set up a new department. We'll hire a couple more FTEs to manage permits, and what happens when I move, and how does the new guy get a permit, and do I get a guest permit? It's not rocket science. It's just work. It takes administrative capacity at the city. If you care enough about it, then you do it. You pay those people to do that job. Andrea, have you guys talked about that at all?
So our city does have some residential permitting areas, and so it's actually done through our city clerk's office, and there is quite the enforcement that goes with that. So not only are you processing permits, but you also have to enforce it, and that enforcement has to not only occur during daytime hours, it often has to occur through the evening hours as well, depending on what that is. So there is that that we do have to take into account. And, things evolve over time as well. So, I mean, we do have some most of ours that I think we currently have now are either adjacent to downtown or Boise State University, because they do have those overflow parking that if somebody has to pay for parking in one area, they kind of move to an area where there's that path of least resistance and they park there.
So, but we have several ideas on the table. Expand P1, get rid of parking beyond P1 in a more broad-brushed way with separate rules for the areas that are close to residential neighborhoods, or option 3, expand the permit parking system so that neighborhoods that say, hey, we want one, can get one, and the city enforces it. So those are all three of the, but just all three of those are on the table. Let's do this. I want to do this very briefly. I don't think it's a long conversation. I'll leave us a couple minutes to wind up. So, as I said, I've probably said several times, this is a new chapter. Zoning in its pure form says, you come to, a subdivision says, you come to us, we tell you how to lay the lots out, we tell you how good the streets and parks have to be, you give them to us, we maintain them, and we're done. You're done. There's no continuing obligation. Zoning says, and when you buy one of those lots and you want to build something, you come to us and we tell you how many trees you're going to have and parking and how tall the building can be, whether you can get an access into the street, and whether you got good utilities, and you're done. You're gone. Good luck. The force be with you. But the newer ordinances often say, no, if we required you to have something because it reduces the heat island, because it reduces glare, because the lights are low enough that they don't create dark skies or annoy their neighbors, because frankly, the sign advertises that business. Signs are an issue. The sign advertises that business, and when you move away, you got to take it down. So newer codes say there is a continuing obligation. We're putting them here. This is the chapter. You should be forewarned that after you get an approval from the city, you will need to maintain the landscaping. If it dies, you replace it. If the exterior lighting is required to be no higher than 15 feet near a single family house or 20 feet, you cannot replace it with a 30-foot fixture. You cannot replace it with something else. Noise signs need to not be decrepit, and they can't be totally inaccurate. You can't say Don's Muffler Shop when Don's Muffler Shop has been gone for years. You take that down. We're not telling you what to put up. We're telling you it's your duty to take it down. It no longer has any relationship to this site. Glare, heat, noise, fumes, vibration, all of these things that say it's a mixture of nuisance. How do you operate it? But not just how do you operate it. The new things on this list are landscaping, buffering, screening, exterior lighting, and signs that are affirmative obligations. In addition to everything below that is, hey, we could have cited you for this anyway. You're annoying everybody with your noise. There's a standard for that. You're vibrating your neighbor's property. There's always been a standard for that. We can enforce it through nuisance. This chapter says, okay, all that stuff still applies. And we have these new things that happen in new codes, and you need to maintain them or repair them if they're broken. So I just want everybody to be aware of that. That's a change. I think I've only had 1 or 2 clients in the last 10 years who said, nah, we don't do that here. Most of them say, gee, I'm surprised we haven't done that already. If we said you had to have trees along the street, then you got to have trees along the street. That means not today. That means going down the road. We want trees on the street. So I just wanted to call your attention to that because it's a significant change. The first 3 bullets are a bit of a change from what you have today. I'll say in passing, since I don't see an outcry of people wanting to comment, often enforcing the bottom 5 of these or bottom 4 of these through nuisance is somewhat expensive and time consuming. Sometimes you have to take people to court. So when you take those nuisance things and put them into a code, we haven't written the 3rd module about processes and enforcement, but it gives the city the option under whatever law, Idaho law. We would have to take you to court to enforce this vibration problem, this odor problem, this noise, this heat problem. And now we have the option of citing you under the zoning ordinance. That's a lot cheaper. That's a lot easier. So let's put it in here. And that gives us the option to do one or the other. It's not new. It's just a different way of enforcing it by making it a grounds for a zoning violation. Thoughts? Anybody? Everybody tired?
We have 4 minutes.
Ian.
I'll go. There's only a few of these that are, I guess, exciting to me. Really, the landscaping one I see as being interesting and probably important because, ultimately somebody could buy a property that met the tree requirements for the city and just decide to cut down a tree and for no other reason that they didn't like the tree. So, I'm generally probably in favor of these. I don't know how this gets written into the zoning code. I don't quite understand that yet, but The lighting one I particularly agree with, especially living adjacent to the commercial area. I would be interested in how the signage one would play into, maybe historic or older properties that have had that sign there for years and new owner wants to keep it or something, maybe there's an exception to that. So.
To a couple of answers, there usually is an exception. You don't make them take the sign down. You usually say you need to take out the content that's misleading to the public. And the usual justification is it's a traffic hazard to get the public to think it's Don's Mufflers when it's not Don's Mufflers. And that's so you don't have to take the sign down. You can keep the structure, but you do, unless I guess your point is like the Citgo sign at Fenway Park. There is a process for saying, I know the sign's misleading, but we all love it and we're going to keep it. And that comes up in the historic preservation stuff. So I think that's, I wanted to say one other thing. How does it get written into the code? Well, you'll see when we release module 2, but like all zoning, this is complaint based. Basically, if somebody calls up and says that guy's trees are all dead, you required him to buffer me from him because he's commercial and I'm residential and the trees are all dead. Then the city goes out and says, yep, the site plan says there are going to be trees and shrubbery along there and it's gone. Under most current codes, the answer is, gee, that's too bad. Under this proposed code, the city would say, you need to replace that landscaping. That was part of your site plan. So.
Roberta has her hand raised.
I started to write this in the comments because I noticed how late it was. And I hearkened back to the beginning of the meeting and extending the time for module 2, because, a lot of this for us who've participated is still, for me personally, like drinking from a fire hose at times. And so the opportunity to engage more of the community, even though I know community engagement can be a challenge in any topic. I'm just wondering if there's some point in the future where we could talk about that as a group as to how this word is getting out, because I know the perceptions of the people that I've talked to, it's a challenge. It's a challenge for everyone. So what if you could answer that, Andrea, or, something we could discuss in the future, that would be great.
Yes, I think that this is a topic that's going to impact everyone throughout the city, whether you're a visitor or a resident or a business. I don't think it's going to matter. It's going to impact you. And so engagement is important. Over the next month, we will be talking about some of those. So I think we are open to having that open conversation with you and gathering your ideas on how we can communicate that as well. And really making things digestible for people. As you said, not only is it a lot of information, but sometimes it's really complex information. And so breaking it down and making it understandable is equally as important rather than just taking it out. So we can certainly bring that back to you and gather some thoughts. Once we get maybe a draft, we can come back and say, hey, do you think we got this right? And let you guys comment on that, because it's going to be important, especially as we are in these difficult times.
That would be great. I appreciate that. And I would add on to that what this group can and cannot do is also part of the big perception issue, because there's only certain things that rezoning will address. So
yeah, that's right.
I look forward to maybe having a group discussion or however you choose to proceed with that.
I think it's a good idea. So September 16th is the next meeting. I'll tell you I don't know if it's good news or bad news. At present, I'm hoping to be out there. I would love to be there for in person, even if I'm the only one sitting with Andrea in a room. And the big asterisk is, what in the world is a Delta variant going to do? So we will not do anything silly, but we tried. I wanted, the city originally wanted me to be out there to meet with you folks in person if possible. Now, didn't work in August. We were planning on September. We will not be stupid. If it doesn't make sense, we won't do it. But I would love to get back and start doing meetings in person, and are planning on that for next month, unless it's an unwise thing to do for a public health situation. So thanks. Thank you all.
All right. Well, thank everybody for attending and for all of your great comments. As always, we appreciate you. I will be sending out minutes probably sometime tomorrow morning. We will go ahead and attach a survey for you so that you can go ahead and submit any comments that might come to you overnight or as they might pop up over the next few days. We always keep that open for about 2 weeks. So just remember that if you have those comments or thoughts, let us know so that we can certainly start to incorporate some of those as well as we're moving through this difficult module too. But other than that, we will see you in September and we hope that everybody remains safe.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
patience and your interest. Thanks.